What does this monstrosity cost?
Jerry, what's the sticker price?
$270 million.
This monstrosity cost
$270 million.
What have I done? I'm ruined!
It's Hollywood, baby.
I don't often do reviews for stuff that has just come out in the cinema, but when I do, I often have to go to the cinema alone, as most people I know don't really want to spend their day watching a kids film. But that's normally not too bad, as for stuff like the Sonic movies or the Mario movie, the cinema is pretty packed and I can just blend in. But yeah, this was my cinema showing on seeing Snow White. I think there must have been a total of 10 people in that entire screening. Which is a very odd thing when you consider the success and legacy of the original 1937 film. It was Disney's first ever feature-length film and the first ever hand-drawn feature-length film. It was something that many people didn't even think was possible to make at the time, as it would be incredibly expensive and time-consuming to produce, and even if you did make it, would people even go to see it? Audiences were used to seeing animation in short 6 to 10 minute cartoons. Would they even sit in their seats for over an hour? It was very much something that Walt was putting a massive gamble on, but he was truly passionate about the project, and so the greatest of efforts were put into making it. New technologies were brought in, the quality of both the sound and visuals were like that of which had never been seen before, and even to this day, it's still an absolute spectacle to behold. And thanks to all of that hard work, time, and dedication, the film ended up being a huge hit for Disney and launched not only Disney into success, but also the animation genre as a whole. And so you'd think for a film that was such an amazing feat at the time and helped to make the company what it is today, that Disney would very much want to pay gratitude to the original product and celebrate its legacy with its live action adaptation. But as information on the film began to emerge, it was becoming clear that something was wrong, and rather than wanting to recreate the original, Disney was instead trying to change everything about it, from the plot, to the dwarfs, and even to Snow White herself. With the role of Snow White being given to Rachel Zegler, a controversial decision in on itself, as it looked like Disney was pulling their classic race swap card again, already showing that they didn't want to make a faithful recreation to the original. But normally you could make the argument of, well, does it really matter what race the character is, so long as the character is being played well? Well, in this case, it actually does kind of matter, as in the original story of Snow White, her parents wished for a daughter whose skin would be as white as snow, and so when she was born as such, that's what led to them actually calling her Snow White. So you've effectively removed the entire point of the character's name. But putting all that stuff aside, Ziegler really didn't help on matters, as in early interviews she would begin throwing shade at the original, calling it dated, criticising the love story, and saying that this new rendition would be made for a 2022 audience.
I know that you've told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White.
The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
So instead of this new film looking like a homage and celebration of the original, it was rather there to smear it in the dirt, saying that, oh, don't worry, we know that the old one was a shameful, dated, and distant relic from a different time, but don't you worry, as this new one will correct all of those past atrocities and will give you the Snow White a modern audience deserves. Much to Disney's surprise, people didn't respond too well to this, with trailers and all other forms of promotional material getting heavily disliked and criticised. And so Disney quickly tried to implement damage control, with Ziegler now appearing to have been muzzled for all future interviews, giving much less controversial opinions, and now even praising the original film.
The cartoon's so beloved. It's like a monumental moment in film history. It won honorary Oscars and all of these amazing things that happened for that film are the reason that you and I really get to sit here today.
The remake release date was also put back by a year, and this was allegedly due to the 2023 actors' strike, but speculation is that it was actually due to Disney frantically performing some last-minute rewrites and reshoots. And with the final product that we got, I'd say that speculation seems to hold a lot of ground. The film actually begins very much similar to the original. Snow White is seen working as a servant under the evil queen's rule, though we do see a bit more of her childhood, and there are a few extra scenes with her and the Queen, but for the most part it's the same. The Queen hears that Snow White is the fairest of them all, and so Snow White has to flee into the woods to escape her, where she meets the dwarfs, and we get the whole sing and dance routine. But then the film seems to take a bit of a sidestep, as she goes out into the woods, where she meets the prince, or head bandit in this case, I'm still going to call him the prince, along with 7 other bandits. Yeah, so remember this image that circulated and everyone believed that these were going to be the 7 dwarfs? Well, now they're just a random group of bandits. And so Snow White briefly hangs out with them, only for the prince to take an arrow to the chest, in which they bring him back to the dwarf's house, where he's healed up, and then the bandits just kinda leave. And that's it. Now, my conspiracy is that these bandits were in fact going to be the 7 dwarf equivalents, but due to the immense backlash, Disney cut much of their plot from the film and shoehorned in the original dwarfs after. Because despite the uniqueness of all of these bandits, only the prince and the short one here actually get any dialogue or screen time. And there was a brief line spoken which mentioned a romance between the short guy and another bandit, but then it's immediately dropped and never brought up again. It just seems so strange that we get introduced to these 7 other characters only for them to have 0 impact on the plot. But then the plot starts to go back to more normal as we get the evil queen disguise herself as the old lady, where she tricks Snow White into eating the poison apple, which then knocks her out. But here's where things change a bit again, as in the original, the dwarfs chase the queen down, which leads to her falling to her death, and then the prince comes along to revive Snow White, where the film ends. Here, however, the prince comes along first and revives Snow White with a kiss. Hey, what happened to that whole Snow White not being rescued by the prince thing?
She's not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love.
And then they head out to the castle to confront the queen. I guess this was done to have it so that Snow White wasn't portrayed as totally helpless, and that she's going to go off to defeat the queen herself. But the thing is, she doesn't really do anything. She walks into the kingdom, says nothing, but then all the civilians see her and just decide to rally behind her, which makes no sense, as it was stated earlier in the film by the prince that he, and presumably many of the other citizens, thought Snow White was just complacent with the queen's tyrannical rule because they had never seen her over the many years. So why, after suddenly seeing her appear in flesh, would they all be rallying behind her? The queen then orders one of the guards to kill Snow White. Why she just doesn't do it herself, I have no idea. But then Snow White says how she once remembers the guard, being like, "Oh, your name is Paul, you have a wife, and you used to be a farmer and grow cherry orchards." And she does this for like all the other guards, who after hearing this, then decide to turn on the queen. This might have had more weight to it had we have actually seen Snow White interacting with these people at a younger age, but instead it's just given to us in a brief bit of narration that the guards used to once be farmers. And then when Snow White confronts the queen, again, she doesn't even defeat her. Instead, the queen smashes the magic mirror and gets sucked into its portal or something. Not really sure that was the really heroic girl boss ending we were told we were going to get. In fact, Snow White wasn't really much of a girl boss at all, as the prince not only gives her the true love's kiss which revives her, but he also saves her life by diving in front of her and taking an arrow to the chest. Well, so much for not being saved by the prince, I guess.
She's not going to be saved by the prince.
And I don't really know what Snow White's arc in this film was. I guess she was meant to be too timid to stand up to the queen? But what did she do throughout the film to change that? She kind of just sung songs and frolicked around for about an hour, nearly dies, and then is like, okay, yeah, I'm ready to take on the queen now. Like, bitch, you didn't do anything. There's still no real romantic chemistry between Snow White and the prince. They try to add a little more interaction between them, but it still feels like it comes out of absolutely nowhere. There are a lot of song numbers in this film, and yeah, I get it, it's a musical, but it just felt like every few minutes a character would break into song. I enjoyed the classic renditions, but the newer stuff just felt very meh and forgettable. The mirror now says fairest of them all in a more literal sense, so not meaning just beauty, but also the fact that she's fair in like the justice type of sense. But if that's the case, then surely that would mean every girl in the kingdom is more fair than the evil queen. I will end this review on just saying a couple of positives I had with the film. Despite their horrid appearance, I did actually quite like the dwarfs in this. They are far less simpy over Snow White than in the original. Grumpy got some solid lines in here and there, and Dopey actually had a bit of an arc in this. And I actually did like the bond that him and Snow White formed. They probably had more chemistry than her and the prince actually. I also thought that Gal Gadot played the evil queen really well, probably the best casting in this entire film. And Ziegler, putting all controversies aside, I didn't actually hate her as Snow White. Her performance was fine, nothing breathtaking, but not really terrible either. And her singing was actually alright, though I did notice that she would struggle to hit some of the high notes, and you could actually hear her voice starting to flake a little bit. But yeah, that's Snow White. What did you guys think of it? Did you actually go and see it? And did your screenings look at least a bit more populated than mine? Let me know in the comments below, and until the next one, take care.